Hello, everyone. We have Alex Capecelatro, who is the founder and CEO of Josh.ai, a voice-controlled home automation platform with a focus on artificial intelligence. Josh.ai utilizes a proprietary natural language understanding engine with state-of-the-art home control integration for a powerful smart home experience. Alex started his career as a research scientist at NASA, the Naval Research Lab, and later Sandia National Laboratory. He then ventured into consumer technology, first with an electric car manufacturer, Fisker Automotive, then through founding two social software products at The Pool and Yeti, with members in more than 120 countries. Alex's focus is at the intersection of elegant design, cutting-edge software, and purposeful hardware to offer transformational experiences. Alex received his engineering degree from UCLA in 2010. And one interesting point is the company, Josh.ai, recently raised $11 million in the first quarter of this year, if I'm not mistaken, to continue to scale out the business. So very interesting. You know, another interesting thing that I found out is you guys got your start in the Midwest in Denver. You know, you hear about most folks coming out of either the West Coast or the East Coast. So what are you from Denver?
Great to be here, by the way. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the introduction. Yeah, my business partner, CTO, is based in Denver. He's been building tech companies there for decades now. And when we were starting the company, I was actually living out in Los Angeles. We thought there's a real advantage in building in both places when you're competing for talent, when you're looking at kind of growing the customer base for what we do. And also office space is less. There are a lot of benefit being based in Colorado. And it's been interesting. I would say our initial sort of 5 to 10 employees mostly relocated to Denver. And in the last couple of years, Denver's a booming economy. You've got lots of people moving there. We're now finding people that they live a quarter mile down the street. They're right in the neighborhood. So Denver, we didn't know in the beginning if Denver was going to be sort of the right place to build this. Right. And it's been wonderful. There are also some really good robotics companies in our industry, a lot of cable companies. And so there's a number of really fun companies to, shall I say, steal from, because we're kind of the cool company in town.
Yeah. No, what's interesting, so when I was investing in software companies, we did find that there was a pretty nice market for talent in Colorado, specifically in Denver. So I found it very interesting that you all had an office out there. I want to kick this off, and I want to kind of frame the conversation today, starting with the problem that you all are solving over at Josh.ai. I watched a bit of the video and felt a little bit like Tony Stark in his home when he's leveraging AI to do what he needs to do. But would love to kick it off by framing the conversation with the problem you're solving, and even the traditional approach to solving that problem.
Yeah, no, happy to. And I also just want to preface with, this is such a fast growing field that the target is moving all the time, that the problem has evolved. When we got started, I was renovating a large home in Beverly Hills and was renovating a large home in Denver, my business partner. And the offerings for working with an easy to use control system for the home were, shall we say, underwhelming. It felt like everything was complicated, expensive, really hard to use. And we started chatting with every friend we knew that had a smart home or any smart technology. And it really felt like the Uber opportunity relative to what they did to taxis. You talk to people before Uber, they took a taxi because there were no other options. It was the only way to get around, but no one enjoyed it. It was not pleasant in the least. And that's the way the smart home very much felt to us. When we dug deeper, though, what was interesting was we realized most smart home companies are really hardware first companies. They make HVAC equipment and speakers and lighting systems and TVs, and many of them aren't software first businesses. And when you think about reinventing the home from a software perspective, it's all about data, it's all about AI, it's all about personalization. And so we started thinking about, beyond just building a control system, what if your home could be smart enough to let you know that there's a light that burned out, your HVAC filter needs to be replaced, maybe there's a security issue or a bear broke into your house, whatever it happens to be. You know, in
Right.
Colorado, that stuff happens. And so we started really thinking through what would a real smart home look like? What things can we automate? What knowledge can we start to really present to the user to give them clarity? This gets into things like health and wellness, indoor air quality. You're touching on things like energy management. You know, people don't always realize that you run a thermostat for 24 hours, you're using more energy than if you left your lights on for an entire year. Right. And so a software first approach to the smart home was really pretty novel when we were beginning. But as you probably understand, and many of the listeners, when you're breaking into an industry, you need to have something really transformational to capture people's attention. And for us, that initial sort of spark that we thought would propel the whole business forward was voice control. At the time, there was no Alexa, there was no Google Assistant, there was no Apple HomePod. And the idea of walking into a home, and for many of us today, this sounds obvious, but talk to your parents, right? Talk to folks that didn't grow up with the internet. The idea that you can walk in a room and you can say, I want to listen to this song by this artist. I want to watch this show on Netflix. I want these devices to turn on. I mean, I can snap my fingers and turn my fireplace on. Like, this is magic. And that emotional reaction that people get is what really helped us to leap ahead of the traditional control systems. But ultimately, I look at voice as just a very small piece of what we're doing. And under the hood, what I think the problem that we're ultimately solving is we're basically creating an operating system for your building. And I say building because it could be a home, could be an apartment, could be a hotel room, could be an office building. I mean, the same technology is going into every structure around. And the operating system has to be able to manage devices, control devices, automate tasks, send alerts. There's a lot more than just voice control. And that's what really, I think, allowed us to go and raise this pretty significant round.
Now, are those those abilities to do more than voice control, is that something that's offered today? Is it on the product roadmap for the future?
Yeah, we do a lot of it today. The roadmap, of course, is far longer than what we've already built. But the way that we approach this, and I think this is important for anyone trying to build an AI system, context is key to get AI to work right. And especially if you're using voice control, you realize people don't always give enough context and enough detail on their command. For example, a common command we have to deal with is someone walks in a room and they say, turn it up. Well, is turn it up the music volume, the TV volume, your thermostat temperature, your light brightness? It can be a lot of different things. And so we actually started off by building a really beautiful app, but basically an app experience that doesn't need to use voice, where it tracks the state of every device. It lets you know what's currently running, lets you control, turn on my bedroom lights, open my shades in the kitchen, set my thermostat to 72 degrees. And by having that data and that knowledge, now when you give a voice command, we're not basically parsing it in the dark. We're parsing it in the context of what's possible.
I get it. So is the idea, for example, historically, to your point, I like the temperature at, really warm, let's say 80 degrees in the morning, right? As the day goes on, maybe it gets hotter in the day, I need to lower that temperature. And so what you've been able to do is see kind of what does a person do in their home throughout the day, right? And then leverage that intelligence to inform what action should be taken based on a person's command, now that you've built out the NLP that you have within the product.
That's definitely a part of it. The other part, though, is we need to track where you are and what's possible so that we can do the right thing. So a basic example of this is people will often say, turn on X, and we need to be smart enough to know what they're talking about. So turn on the lights, should be the lights above you. Turn on the Beatles, should be music. Turn on Breaking Bad, should be the TV show on Netflix. But you forget that this is really complicated because turn on the lights, well, there's a show called The Lights, there's a song called The Lights, there's a band called The Lights. And so we have to now use a whole knowledge graph to figure out what's the right thing to do. And so we're actually looking at where are you giving the command, what devices exist in that room, and then what's the historical context. Because if you give a command in a room saying turn off the lights, and 5 minutes later you say turn on the lights in that same location, that's pretty obvious. On the other
Right.
hand, if you walk into a room where the only connected device is a music player and you're giving music commands all day, every day, and you say turn on the lights, well, in that case, the artist might actually be the right thing to do.
Got it. Got it. And so, in thinking through how you train your algorithms to make the right inference, where were you getting the data from in order to make that happen? And then are you going through a process? What's the process of fine tuning?
Yeah, it's a great question. And something that I think anyone listening that is exploring building products and building AI needs to really heavily consider. Data can be, in my opinion, the worst thing if you don't use it properly. And so you can train a model using all sorts of data, whether it's tagged or untagged, and you end up getting results that might be different than what you would expect. We basically went in and we said the best products out there are able to be efficient and productive before there's data, and then use data to get smarter as opposed to shooting in the dark. And
Right.
so a great example of this would be when Waze got started. So the navigation app, it gets smarter as more people use it. So you can see where other people go at times of day to avoid traffic and the quickest way to get from point A to point B. But when they didn't have data, or if they were in a location that didn't have a lot of traffic, it just fell back to Google Maps, and that was really what they did. So
Mhm.
for us, we basically start off saying our system, when it gets configured, has a mapping of the home. You basically add what rooms do I have, what floors are they on, what devices are in those rooms, and what capabilities do those devices have. A lot of this is automatic. We sort of suck in that and create it automatically. So if you have no data, we've never heard any command. Well, if you say turn on the lights and you're in a room that has lights, we don't need data to do the right thing. It's pretty intuitive. That being said, when you give a command like play some music and you're just being generic,
Right.
initially when there's no data, we just fall back on let's just play popular music. Most people like, sort of generic type music. And then as you start using the system more, that data influences what should come on, not just in terms of we know that Darius likes to listen to, XYZ artist, but we know that when he's in the gym in the morning, he likes this kind of music. When he's in the dining room in the evening, it's a different type of music. And so the data gets parsed in a very specific way. But we always build a platform saying, assume no data, what's the best situation in that case? And then how does data make it better in a very predictable way? Because we don't want to do the wrong thing, because chaos cannot be good. You
Yeah.
run into HAL from 2001 Space Odyssey.
Yeah. And so one thing I'm curious about, because language, there's a bunch of different ways you can express something, right? And so when you think about colloquialisms, um, how do you how did you approach handling those types of instructions?
It is a very hard problem. Years and years and years of development to get it right. And similar to my approach on using data, we basically start with let's capture the common cases. So we always like to break down a sentence into what are the verbs or the actions that can trigger, what are the nouns, what are the adjectives. So
Mm-hmm.
examples would be I can say turn on as the verb, the bedroom lights as the noun, to 50% as sort of a tag or an adjective. And that is something that when we're initially building out the system, we try to use our best judgment or best knowledge. We try to look at what are all the common ways that you can do this, but we know we're going to miss things. We know that it's
Right.
impossible to capture everything. At first we built a system that attempted to automatically recognize common ways of saying things, and even potentially automatically asserting that those are the same. And we've learned the hard way that it's really, really difficult to do this,
Right.
because you change one word and maybe even just one letter in one word, and the entire meaning is now going to be different. And so we've actually taken the approach of increasing the engineering team to focus on natural language processing, and we take a very manual approach. So we're looking at essentially commands that have failed. Why did those fail? Things that people saying. We have people reporting to us, hey, I'm trying to turn on my lights. These are the last commands I gave. And all of that kind of feeds into this sort of rules engine that we've got to make the system better. The thing that we've done, though, which is hard to get right, but really important when you're early on, is to think about many of the advancements you make are going to apply to the entire system. So
Right.
an example would be the first time that someone says, turn on the effing lights. Well, you could just fix that for lights, but then you realize they could say, turn on the damn lights, turn on the, insert other expletive word lights. But they
Right.
could also say the same thing about turn on the effing music, open the effing shades.
Okay. Right.
So we try to generalize the solution so that it applies to anything they could say rather than just fixing the individual command.
Right. And so the point you were making is you keep humans in the loop to be able to fine tune some of that understanding, some of that sentiment analysis.
Yeah. And I will say one of the tricky things, we are very privacy focused with what we do. Clients can choose to have their commands completely locked down. They can choose to have their commands not even saved. And so internally, we look at this as like Snapchat mode or incognito mode, where they give a command, the thing happens, and it's not stored anywhere. And we make a note that if you do that, you're increasing your privacy, but it makes it harder for us to make the system better. And so it's very much an opt-in system where if you choose to share your data, it is definitely anonymized. It's not something that should ever really be able to get back to someone. But if you choose to make that available, the system can get better with that human in the loop, as you mentioned. But it's interesting to note, we have senators and celebrities and CEOs. Yeah. They don't want anything saved, and it's very important to them that, look, I don't care if it's not getting better. I don't want anyone to ever know what commands I gave, and we give that option to the client.
Yeah, and and thinking back to when you first launched the business, right? And now I think you started off with hardware. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I'm curious, as it relates to building the technology that you have today, did you start with an MVP? Was it you who was building it? Was it you and your partner? And then how did you think about, what specific use case do we want to apply our AI to versus the range of things, like the range of things that you mentioned that are on the roadmap or that are capable via home control?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unravel there. I'll try not to go on for too long, but basically I come from a background in research science, working in research labs, places like NASA, where it was very common to invent something in the lab and then try to figure out an application for it. And that is not a great way to start a business. That's not what I would recommend. In our case, we were very clear about there was a problem that both Tim and I had with homes where we wanted an easy to use control system that can do, X, Y, and Z feature. And then we started looking at, do other people have the same problem? Turns out a lot of people did. Then we did a little bit of market sizing to figure out this is a very large multi-billion-dollar opportunity that's growing at a very fast rate. And so we had a very clear understanding that there was a problem that we were trying to solve, what the current solutions were doing, where the gaps were, and what we can try to do about it. At the same time, though, I've built enough product to realize you're not going to get it right the first time. The longer you stay in sort of beta private mode where you're not sharing this, you're living in a vacuum. Like, you're not getting real customer feedback. And also the world's changing. So what people wanted in 2010, it's not what they want in 2015 or 2020. So when we started the company, we made it a goal that we would ship our first product within the same calendar year. Okay. And that, depending on what you're building, might be easy to do or might be very hard to do. But we basically said we want to have something in the market so that we can start getting real customers' feedback. And we want them to say, not just it would be cool if we can do X, Y, or Z, but I would pay money for X, Y, or Z, and here's how much I would pay. And so in order to get there quickly, we didn't start with hardware. We basically said, we're going to use your phone's microphone for voice commands. We're going to ship on a Mac Mini as the initial server. And then as Amazon and Google came out with their products, we actually used those devices as our far-field microphones in the beginning. And we kept hearing the same feedback from clients. They didn't really trust those systems. They didn't really like those systems. But also those systems weren't built with the right integrations and the right hardware for the types of homes that we're in. We really service much more the luxury market where you have large, complicated projects and lots of wireless devices are going to be problematic. So we got customer push to build our own hardware about probably 2 to 2.5 years in. And
Okay.
similar to the first product, we said, let's not make this a very long development cycle that we try to get perfect. Let's ship something and then iterate quickly. So in the world of hardware, it's tough to launch something quickly that's still quality. But we basically went from idea to shipping in 14 months with a
Okay.
complete custom product that was the processor, replaced the Mac Mini, a far-field microphone, speakers, sensors, a whole bunch of stuff in there. And we won a bunch of awards. We got the design right, like a lot that went well. But that was version 1.0. We then quickly moved to 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. And all of these little revisions helped us refine the product. And now we're at a point 5 years in with the company where we're basically launching the next evolution of the product. So it won't even look the same, but everything we've learned is sort of feeding into a future product that we plan to release hopefully this fall.
Yeah, very interesting. And it sounds like you took more of a lean startup approach where it's, we start with a set of assumptions. Let's validate or kill those assumptions as quickly as possible and iterate based on what the customer actually wants versus what we think we want, and spending a ton of money building out money and time building out a product that ultimately may not be marketable.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in sort of the lean startup methodology of move quickly, get customer feedback. But I also think in this day and age, you can't release crap. If what you release
Yeah.
looks like it was hacked together, if it's, sloppy, if it's, slow, it's not going to cut it. And so the trick is, how do you move quickly, but still have a quality product? And it does mean there's certain areas that you basically cut corners, or you say, this isn't needing the refinement today, but the product still needs to be able to live on a shelf next to a product that Google is making or Apple's making and look like it's on par with those. And that, as a small company, is a challenge. But I think if you can figure out where to focus and maybe areas that you don't need to focus, it's the only way to move quickly. Otherwise, I mean, typically product development cycles, depending on what you're building, can be 2 to 4 years. And in startup land, that could be your whole company.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you started out, were those first few customers, were they driven by relationships? Did you go direct to customers, or were there partners that could present you opportunities?
I'm really big on building a brand as early as possible. And so the things that we did early on were, from the very start of the company, we would write a blog post every Monday of every week and start to build credibility, start to build our voice. And a lot of times those blog posts are featuring other companies in the industry, and that gets you attention, and then they're sharing the blog posts. And doing that over the course of the first 12 months helped us really start to get exposure. We also identified the key conferences in our industry and made sure to get there, to start meeting people, shaking hands. The great thing about what we do in the home, we partner with everyone. So we work with Sony and Samsung, we work with Comcast, we work with Lutron, we work with all these brands that are in the home, and they quickly understood the value that we were trying to provide that just made their stuff that much better. And so getting to the first set of customers, it was just a combination of, we were building our social media presence, doing outreach, meeting with folks. But we also, from day one, long before we had a product, we basically made our website a single page website. We didn't make it complicated. And we said, if you're interested in being an early beta tester or an early customer, put in your email, we'll reach out. And over 6 to 12 months of working on what we're working on and having that email capture, getting people in, we built a list of 500 to 1,000 people. And then as we were ready to start moving, we would email 30 of them, get some feedback, then email the next 30. And this doesn't happen overnight. In this, over the course of a number of months, when you need that list, you've got it built.
Okay, very helpful. So I kind of want to switch gears here and talk about building out the team, right? So you started, it was you, your founder. Eventually, you decided, hey, look, we think that this thing could be AI enabled. Right, so I kind of want to understand how you thought about who would be, those next best acts from a engineering perspective, and did you need for those people to have a particular skill set, or was an AI engineer, an AI engineer, an AI engineer?
Yeah, great question. So my viewpoint on things is, you need to be very clear about what you do well, what your co-founder does well, and what you don't do well. And in this case, we were very lucky in the sense that I'm pretty good at sort of the CEO type of stuff about branding, marketing, general sort of operational stuff. And Tim is a great CTO. He built a lot of the AI, the underlying code. I mean, Tim, can basically hack together whatever you might need, even if he hasn't done it. And so when we started building the company, the immediate two roles that we know we needed to fill out of the gate were we needed a great designer. To me, I think you won't get very far if you don't have, a great looking website, great looking product, great looking service. And I was lucky to bring on a designer that I worked with in my two prior companies. And so Jason's now worked with me for 10 years, which is just a great relationship. We then needed to bring on a sort of a back-end engineer for a lot of the low-level drivers and stuff that we're writing. And in that case, we didn't immediately have someone that we thought of and started just recruiting. We found a guy at Microsoft who built a bunch of smart home stuff beforehand. He was excited to move to Denver. He was our first engineering hire. And as we've grown the company, it's always been very clear, what are the current deficits? What are the areas that are moving the slowest or holding things back?
Right.
And so we've basically just taken the approach of whatever the thing is that we need, let's try to find that person. We need an iOS app. I believe wholeheartedly in working with people that know that environment, as opposed to someone that's just kind of playing around. And so work with a great iOS developer, got a great Android developer. On the AI side, what we specifically look for, because we do a lot around natural language processing, is someone that has a computer science degree, which is important because a lot of people who apply for the job don't have a computer science degree, but they've done a dev boot camp or something. And that's fine for some companies, but when you're doing hardcore AI and tech, like to us, that wasn't going to cut it. So computer science degree or equivalent, but also someone who has linguistics background. And it turns out there are enough people with that overlap. It's not a huge number, but enough people. And that was really a great skill set to find, because we need people who understand language. They understand how, to construct sentences properly and all the variables and how it, works in different languages and dialects. But having that computer science background allows them to be very effective at helping to write code.
Got it. So in terms of finding that talent, right, were you generally finding it in Denver, in Los Angeles, Silicon Valley? Where'd you start searching, and where'd you eventually end up pulling people in from?
Yeah, probably in the beginning, the first dozen or so engineers were almost all people who relocated to come to Denver. So we set up the engineering office in Denver, and then more of the sales, marketing, biz dev office in Los Angeles. And on the engineering side, we trying to sort of think through a bunch of the different hires. We got a kid out of Cornell, really smart, great, background. We always do engineering challenges, and so he was excited to move from Cornell out to Denver. We had another guy who was moving from, all over, a bunch of East Coast, a bunch of West Coast, different reasons. We found, though, from a just HR and sort of culture perspective, we always wanted there to be a good reason of why people were coming to Denver, because it means that they were going to be happy. So it was skiers and mountain bikers, people that maybe they grew up coming to Colorado. In two different cases, people had relationships that were in Colorado and they wanted to come and be with their spouses. It's an interesting kind of, I guess the best way to put it is, if someone's willing to just move without a real reason, they'll move again. We want to find people that wanted to move and stay, because you do your best work after a couple years, not on day one.
Right. And then as you scale the team, and particularly interesting today because most folks are working from home, is it something where you say, look, we still want to have our core team in the office? Do you begin to think, look, we can hire remote? What are your thoughts there?
This is changing all the time. Before COVID, I would have said not interested in hiring remote. I really believe in the team camaraderie of being face-to-face. With what we do with IoT devices as well, you want to be in the lab where you've got everything at your fingertips to play with. And when you have really smart people and they can just grab a conference room and a whiteboard session, you get really good dialogue. Since COVID, though, I'd say we've learned that productivity really hasn't dropped. Certain people excel in that environment. It's quiet. It's more, thoughtful.
Right.
And the first time I'm open to now hiring people remote. We're trying to figure out how do we onboard them? How do we, really make sure the culture is going to get created properly? But the world's changing.
Right.
I think if we were to stay, headstrong on wanting people in the office, we'd be left in the past.
Yeah, yeah, and I am particularly interested in how folks begin to think about, staffing, location, now, because you've got larger, and I'm coming at it from the perspective of AI engineers, right, or data scientists. You've got the Googles of the world, essentially folks are saying, look, you don't have to come into the office till mid-July of next year, right? So, and so when you think about there already being this huge gap between, the number of these positions available and the number of people in that market, right? How do you then, number one, compete for that talent? But number two, do it in a way where someone's kind of inspired to come be a part of the organization, just given how many choices that they would have.
Yeah, I mean, I think any organization has to play into their strengths. Yeah. As a smaller company, anyone we hire, they're going to have a very big impact on the product and on the company. And for a lot of folks that come from larger organizations, they love that. They love the fact that in a very short amount of time, we're launching features, building hardware, like we're moving fast. We're also really disrupting the industry that we're in. And we've got a brand recognition of being an exciting place where many of the other companies in the space, they've been around a long time, decade after decade, the product doesn't change that much. But we also are very clear to folks about, look, if you want to just maximize your salary, big companies are probably going to pay you more. We do have stock options that will have, a great incentive if, everything goes well. But part of it is you're going to have a very different day-to-day experience. And I think there's some people that prefer more of a 9-to-5 in a big, corporate environment. Mm-hmm. They want the free lunches, and that's kind of what drives them. Other people want to be much more close to a product that they can really look at and say, if I weren't on this team, this product either wouldn't exist, or it wouldn't have these features, or it wouldn't be as good as it is. Like, that pride is something that we really look for.
Okay. Awesome. And I want to be mindful of time here. I have one more question for you. Now that you've built up and you've got a lot of momentum behind what you've built, especially with it being AI enabled, I want to take it back and say, listen, if you had to start all over again from day one and knowing everything you know now, what would the first 90 days look like for you?
It's tough because the first 90 days are learning, right? Like most of that time is spent just understanding customers, the market, the pain points. And so the knowledge that we learned, and we've talked about this internally, we would have built our own hardware a lot sooner. That really was the secret sauce to getting a product in the market that we could sell and allowing us to really focus on privacy and focus on the things that we need to do best. Until we had our own custom hardware, we were 50% of what we could do. I mean, we were running with weights on our backs like that. Okay. That was not the right approach. But also building hardware it's very expensive. It takes a lot of time, takes certain skill sets. You don't want to make that decision unless you're sure it's the right decision. Right. But knowing what I know now, it was definitely the right decision. And then, the other thing is we've always been very headstrong on, we don't want this to be a company that has to rely on round after round, raising lots of money. We want to build a company that can be profitable and grow on its own. And while it's really hard to do that in the technology world, because to compete with someone like Amazon on just revenue, it's tough. You need that infusion of capital to really move faster. But I would say we made a lot of false starts, right? Like in startup, you're going to go left and then come back and retrace your steps, go right, come back, retrace your steps. And the path from where we were to where we are could have been shorter had we known, don't bother with that, avoid this. Like, there were things we learned that took months and months of time that we didn't know until we got through it, that that was not the right thing to do.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Awesome. Well, that's it. That's all we have for time today. Last thing though, where can we find you? This sounds like something very interesting that we could all use in our personal lives. So what's the best way to find you, find the company, find the product?
Thanks. So the company is just Josh.ai. That's the website. There's no .com, just Josh.ai. And then we're on all social media as Josh.ai, but spelling out the dots. So JOSHDOTAI on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc. So hit us up.